dedicated lobbyist in Jeff City, working solely on defeating anti-trans legislation. We've recently filed lawsuits to reverse provisions in a law passed last year denying trans youth gender affirming care, and another lawsuit recently against the school district discriminating against a trans student for using the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity. Most recently, we've started a project creating public education videos for our supporters to learn about transgender rights. Every issue that we tackle, whether it's trans justice work, reproductive freedom, voting rights, or any other, gets this holistic treatment. And I think that we're stronger for it um, rather than just filing lawsuits or lobbying in Jeff City. So that is the who, the why, and the how. And I'll pass it back to Luce to talk a little bit about just what our priority campaigns are and the work that we're doing in Missouri. Oh, there we go.
All right. Thank you, Riva. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about the programmatic work that we are engaging in. So at the ACLU of Missouri, we've identified a few key priority issues because civil rights, civil liberties is a broad spectrum. And so we want to really hone in on the most pressing civil rights and liberties issues here in Missouri. And our top priorities include voting rights, trans rights, and reproductive rights. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of those in a second. But I wanted to also share that in addition to these priorities, we do engage in other work that intersects with these priorities. I'll start with just voting rights. Voting rights intersects with every priority that we have, every issue that we are working on. Voting rights is instrumental and important. And it's the way that we can make sure that the people are being heard and the government is being held accountable to the people. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on voting rights in a little bit. But I wanted to talk about our other issues that intersect with these that you see us and know us for. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so some of the other issues that we work on include school to prison pipeline. I can go on for an hour about how if our children are not coming out of school and being funneled into the prison system, how that impacts voting rights, how that impacts our democracy, how we're not producing children who can read beyond a third grade level, how they can't fully participate in our democracy. So I won't do that today. But I just wanted to share because we get a lot of questions about why school to prison pipeline. That is why. We are very well known for our First Amendment work. These days, it actually intersects a lot with our trans rights work. So we are involved in book banning cases. We have ongoing litigation against the state of Missouri and school districts involving book banning. A lot of what we're seeing is the books that are being banned are books written by and for the trans community, along with other minority groups. And our First Amendment rights work varies. It can come in the form of protester rights and other types of like issues that come up that intersect with our priority issues, where we see the First Amendment issue and how it relates to our other priority issues. We do a lot of government transparency work, sunshine law requests. That is how the people know what their government is doing, and you have a right to access that information. Um, Surprise, governments don't like to release the information. So we have current ongoing sunshine law cases that we work on. Oftentimes, it's also with our partners. We work in coalition a lot, and our partners are trying to obtain information for their own mission to do their own work, and they're being denied access to that information. So we are often representing other organizations who are seeking access to this information to do their amazing work. We work on privacy protections and we work on police reform and smart justice. And again, you know, these are other issues. They're not necessarily the top issues that we are always focused on, but they intersect with a lot of our other work. Okay, so I wanted to get into voting rights a little bit and talk about a lot of our current work. So in 2022, the Missouri legislature passed what we call an omnibus bill. I don't know how familiar you are with this. It was like this 80 something page beast of a bill that really restricted voting rights in a whole host of ways, including requiring what is called strict government issued photo ID in order to vote, and also criminalizing voter engagement activities such as like soliciting absentee ballots, putting a whole bunch of restrictions on who can even register folks to vote and how people can be registered to vote. All of that really impacts the people's ability to cast their ballot at the ballot box. And so the ACLU of Missouri, we definitely worked up in the legislature to try to minimize the impact of that law. But when it passed, the next recourse we had was to go to court. So we did file litigation, two pieces of litigation, along with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. And we represent in those two pieces of litigation the NAACP and the League of Women Voters. It varies who the plaintiffs are, along with individual plaintiffs who are being impacted by this bill. Um, the first piece of litigation involves the strict voter ID issues, really honing in on why government photo ID impacts people's ability to go and vote and like who it is impacting. It is impacting certain segments of the community and disenfranchising them. And we have a lot of information from our experts about whether requiring strict voter ID really reduces fraud, which is the reason why um, this law was put into place. In addition, we're working on the second piece of litigation, which is that criminalization bill, where there are a lot of restrictions that were put into place that could land someone who is trying to engage voters in prison. We have a lot of groups like the League of Women Voters who engage in those activities, and so for them, it's very concerning when they have all of these potential issues uh, that they could be criminalized for. Those two pieces of litigation are ongoing. We had a trial for the voter ID case in November. It has not yet concluded. We're waiting on closing arguments. But I sat through a week-long trial right before the Thanksgiving holiday, listening to individual plaintiffs talk about how it was really challenging for them to get a government-issued photo ID, either because in one case, their birth certificate that was issued did not match another document that was issued in terms of how their name was written on the document. Um, in other cases, just lack of access, someone who doesn't drive, someone who doesn't have access to the internet, someone who previously voted regularly using their card that was mailed to them, but no longer had that opportunity because they didn't have the type of ID that they needed to cast their ballot. Um, so we sat through that. We're waiting on that, and we hope to hear soon about that case. We hope to finish closing arguments and hear soon. We expect that case to go up and down the courts before it is ultimately decided and final. In terms of the solicitation for the voter engagement type of uh, case. That case is ongoing. We did win a preliminary injunction in that case that restricted several parts of that bill from going into effect. So that's a good thing. But it is not yet finally determined. We expect to go to trial in that case in the spring, and our team is working nonstop in depositions for that case. Not listed here, but some of the other work that we've been working on is there is a language and disability access to the ballot box in Missouri. There's a statute that also criminalizes folks who are interpreters and folks who may need to help someone with a disability if they help more than one person, unless it's a relative. Uh, at the ballot box. And so that's an issue that we are looking at and have filed litigation over with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund and the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. So we talked a little bit about transgender rights. We really fight to afford trans youth and their families the dignity of continuing to make important medical decisions without interference from the political branches of government. Historically, trans youth has been under attack in our state in our state for many, many years. 2 years ago, we defeated behind the scenes every potential anti-trans bill that was proposed. And we had a record, believe it or not, here in Missouri of actually being able to thwart those bills from coming to fruition. Last year was a heartbreaking year where we saw, not just in Missouri, but across the country, attacks on our trans youth, unlike what we had seen before. And last year, two anti trans bills passed, including a sports ban and a ban on gender affirming care for trans youth that really restricted gender affirming care for trans youth who were not already receiving it and created challenges for those who were already currently receiving gender affirming care to continue to receive that gender affirming care. Um, so there is a whole bunch of history with the attorney general even before those two bills passed straight up trying to outlaw gender affirming care for everyone in Missouri. So before those two laws passed, he tried to enact a total ban. We had to go to court seeking a preliminary injunction from any of that coming into play. We won in court. And he eventually withdrew his gender affirming ban. He was trying to use a merchandising statute to say that it was unlawful, and he had the authority to enact this ban for everyone. Not it wasn't youth specific. Shortly thereafter, though, is when the gender affirming care ban bill passed and the ban on the sports. We did file litigation. We have ongoing litigation against the bill, which bars that gender affirming care for trans youth. It's been really encouraging to see families step up to the plate who want to challenge this law and this bill. Medical providers who are coming together saying, this is about healthcare. And it's been at times really hard to see the impact that this is actually having on families and our plaintiffs. For those of you who are interested, earlier in the week, there was an AP story about our plaintiff, Mr. Farr, who talked about his journey. He came from a rural town in, I believe it was Arkansas, and he was very anti-trans. And then his daughter came out, and he talks about his journey in accepting that this is who she was, how he reconciled that with his religion, and how now he is an entirely different person and really, doesn't like to even think about who he was before this experience. And really, what he's trying to talk about is when you don't know anyone who is trans, you cannot necessarily see that they are people. Then I saw it was my daughter. And I became very concerned about what was happening with her. He is our plaintiff in, Riva alluded to a bathroom case in a school district. He saw the impact of the school suspending his daughter for using the bathroom that aligned with her. And the school district suspended her. That led to depression on her part. That led to bullying, other students bullying her. And so he really speaks from a parent perspective who just wants what's best for their child, and talks about the humanity piece of the bills and what we're seeing today. Okay, reproductive freedom. Oh goodness. So there's a lot to talk about in terms of reproductive freedom. What I'll say is the right to an abortion in Missouri has really existed on paper for a long time and was curtailed time and time again. So that by the time we got to June 2022, where the trigger ban came into place and all abortion in Missouri happened, it had already been restricted severely in prior years. The other thing that we had started to see in Missouri in prior years, and that we're still seeing, is pretty much every reproductive freedom right at stake. We have our legislature talking about, banning birth control, criminalizing women and anyone who wants to help a woman get an abortion crossing state lines. These are ongoing discussions. These are not new discussions. So I wanted to give a quick history lesson about how we got to where we are today, and where we are today, and some hopefully inspiring and motivational news. Okay, so in 2019, the legislature passed the Cascading Bans bill That was a bill, it was called HB 126. It was a bill that restricted the right to an abortion at various different weeks, depending on what the courts would uphold. It was like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. In addition, that bill enacted what was used to ban all abortion in 2022. It enacted the trigger law, which basically said if Roe falls in the courts, the Attorney General can enact this trigger law to ban all abortion in Missouri. And that's exactly what he did when Roe fell in 2022. Attorney General Bailey enacted the trigger law. And within minutes of the Supreme Court decision, I believe it was 6 minutes, we were the first state to use our trigger law and enact a total ban of abortion. In 2019, when the cascading bills passed, we, as the ACLU, came together with a group of other pro-reproductive freedom activists and groups. And one of the constitutional rights that we have here in the state of Missouri, it's not a constitutional right in every state, and we have it here, is the right to referendum and the right to the initiative petition process. I look at those as two sides of the same coin. The right to referendum is basically the citizen's veto. So if the legislature passes something, the citizens can put that thing on the ballot for an upvote or a no vote. The initiative petition process is the affirmative way for the citizens to put something directly on the ballot. If there is an issue that you want to put on the ballot, you can do that using the initiative petition process. Both processes require a very similar, just procedural process, which requires well, in the citizens petition veto, you don't have to draft anything, right? You're just saying vote this down. But for the initiative petition process, you draft the change that you want to see enacted in our Missouri Constitution. You gather a whole bunch of signatures. I'll get into that in a little bit. The Secretary of State validates the signatures if you reach the amount, and then it goes on the ballot. The governor gets to choose if it goes on August or November. You can only do this on a general election year. So in 2019, the groups came together and tried to use the citizens' veto process. However, the Secretary of State delayed that process and delayed the opportunity for the groups to go out and gather the over 170,000 signatures that they would need to put this on the ballot. Because of the delays, the ACLU of Missouri litigated that issue all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court, and we won. However, by the time we won, there were about 2 weeks left in order to gather the amount of required signatures to put it on the ballot, which meant it's impossible to do at that point. Um, it's very expensive to gather signatures. It takes a significant amount of time. And the Secretary of State in the state of Missouri know this. And that's why their tactic when they don't want something on the ballot is to delay the process. Those groups stayed together and said, look, we have grave concerns that Roe is going to fall. We're seeing what's happening in Missouri. What would it look like to affirmatively put reproductive freedom on the ballot in Missouri? And we continue to explore that option. That led to the creation of this year, the Missourians for Constitutional Freedom Ballot Initiative. So in January or February of this year, we publicly launched Missourians for Constitutional Freedom, which is a statewide coalition of organizations, including the ACLU of Missouri, that is working together to put abortion and other reproductive freedoms on the ballot in 2024. We are actively gathering signatures, trying to make sure that we have enough signatures to qualify to put this on the ballot in either August or November of 2024. We have a tight deadline. We are less than 3 weeks away from our deadline to submit the required signatures. So we have to submit those required signatures by May 5th. So the teams are doing nothing these days but going out and telling folks, if you have not yet signed the petition, go out and sign the petition because we need every signature. We know this is a winnable issue in Missouri. We know that Missourians and our elected officials are disconnected on this issue, and that this issue transcends and crosses all political lines. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in spaces that I've never thought I would be in before. with supporters from all neck of the woods who say this is an issue that is a private issue amongst families between their providers and the patient, and government should not be interfering in these private medical decisions. So I'm going to pass it over to Reva.
So I'd like to share a little bit about how you can get involved in the work that the ACLU of Missouri is doing. Well, you can start by advocating for the issues that you care about. We always encourage our supporters to reach out to their representatives, write letters, make their voices heard. Every year, we host a lobby day in Jeff City where you're invited to join us in speaking directly to your congressmen and women about the changes you'd like to see. We also have an action network that you can sign up for at aclu-mo.org, where you can learn about other volunteer opportunities and calls to action as they arise. And you can also support us monetarily. You can become a card-carrying member of the ACLU by a monthly donation, or you can make a tax-deductible gift directly to the ACLU of Missouri. We rely on the contributions of our fellow Missourians to fuel our work. And if you're fired up about the Missourians for Constitutional Freedom campaign, you can scan this QR code or go to the website to donate and join the fight in our efforts to restore abortion access in the state. And finally, if you are a registered Missouri voter and you have not signed the petition yet but would like to, Lutz and I have petitions that you can sign. We'll be here after to gather signatures. That's it for me. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Interrupt for a second. I think there's a housekeeping matter, which is we take a collection to support the work of the forum. So while George passes around the basket, I have a small gift for speakers.
Oh,
That's
nice.
the microphone. This one is get your own organ. And
Thank you.
Yep. And this one is a print flag. So who gets what? And question and answer. If you feel more comfortable having your question not broadcast, I know Luz and Regal will be around. And do we pass around the mic? Okay. No, I turned it off. Okay, so if you have any questions, please come up ahead. Nope. Well, that's a question. I have so many. We have a church member here, Sierra Yackel, and her father and mother are also members here, and they were involved in a case involving book banning and independence. Can you give us an update on book banning and the independence case?
Yeah, so specifically the independence case, we were in the Eighth Circuit on Tuesday, arguing, so we appealed we were dismissed at the lower court because of standing issues. And so we appealed to the Eighth Circuit on standing issues. And we expect an opinion hopefully in the next few weeks. We are very, very confident that the plaintiffs have standing to bring those claims.
What do you mean by standing? Can you explain what that is?
So we're challenging the policy, and the state is arguing, or not the state, I'm sorry, the school district is arguing that because there isn't a particular book banning issue, like a particular book banning or a particular book that was banned that we're talking about at this point. We're talking about the policy that there isn't standing. It's a bit of a convoluted argument because there is First Amendment precedent to talk about if there is a policy that can be used. In fact, here it has been used in the past that will impact the First Amendment, that plaintiffs can bring those cases. They're trying to argue there is no case. There's no active book that's been banned, but there could be, and they've used it in the past before.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for all the work the ACLU does. I know it's the muscle in Missouri. For several years, the Missouri legislature has tried to place onerous conditions on the initiative process. They were doing it again this year. I really don't know the status of the legislature being able, by law, being able to require us to collect more signatures in more places. What's the status?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I didn't talk about it in my presentation, but it is very much on our radar. So the legislature for years has been trying to change Missourians' ability to access direct democracy, that constitutional right that we have to put something on the ballot. So they are actively trying to change that process currently. We know that they're trying to change the process because abortion is going to be, I'm confident, on the ballot in 2024. And so they are trying to change the process and then to apply the changes to the process to this ballot initiative that is ongoing. Um, it's very much on our radar. It has not passed out of the legislature yet. If it did pass, it would need to go to a vote of the people. There's a few different variations of what they're trying to do, including, sometimes they talk about changing the number of signatures. Sometimes they talk about reaching a majority in each congressional district in addition to a statewide majority. We call all of that minority rule. Right now, in order to pass a ballot initiative, you need a 50 plus 1% of the, well, 50% plus one of the vote. That's majority rule. And the changes that they are trying to make is because they know that if abortion is on the ballot, abortion will win. And so they're trying to prevent abortion from being on the ballot. And while they say that's not the case, they have also been very, very open about it. When asked who wrote the most recent iterations of the changes to the process that were being presented, it was Missouri Right to Life who wrote it. So we know who's behind it.
And truth and subject to truth, I am a member of the ACLU and I am a contributing member. Uh, the ACLU has been accused in the past of defending groups that aren't exactly mainstream, and I'm talking Nazis, and they have defended their right to demonstrate. Would you comment on that, please?
Sure. So the ACLU has a long history of First Amendment rights. And when we're talking about the First Amendment, we are not doing an analysis of the content in order to do our First Amendment analysis, right? And one of the things that we are very, very aware of, and I think that has developed over time more and more, is the tension between our First Amendment work and some of our other work. There are often different rights at play that are in tension with each other. And as someone who really cares deeply about racial justice, very aware that racial justice and the First Amendment are at times, again, just very, very much in tension with each other. At the same time, because we know that when First Amendment rights are thwarted, when there are restrictions on First Amendment, those restrictions are often on minority groups. And so we defend the First Amendment as an issue, as a principle that we know we will then have to use in one context and apply it to another. When we were doing some of the protest work around the Black Lives Matter movement, the case law that we were applying was the case law we developed from some of those situations that you talked about, because we know that that is where it if the First Amendment can be restricted in one context, it will be applied to the most minority groups, and sometimes those groups are going to be the groups that we really do agree with. So we don't look at the content of it per se when we're doing the First Amendment analysis, but we do recognize the tension when thinking through what priority issue, what priority work we're going to engage in.
Well, I don't see any more questions. If there are no other questions, um, oh, don't wrap it up. Okay, I have another question.
Okay.
So this is to Riva. In the same line, um, you have to go solicit support from big corporations probably and wealthy people and then masses of people as well who care about popular things. How do you go to them and say, we just represented a church that picketed a funeral of a soldier or other things that I would think would be called hate speech?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, especially at the ACLU of Missouri, that hasn't been something we've done recently. Um, and some of the supporters are really First Amendment That is their core issue that they care about. That is why they've started supporting the ACLU, and that is something they'd like to see. Sometimes they get a little frustrated at the way that it's kind of changed in the past 10 years or so. Um, when I'm talking to supporters, I'd like to ask about the issues that they care most about and tailor my approach to them. Um, yeah.
You're right.
I wonder if you, I wonder if you could comment some about ways that you are getting young people involved. And I'm thinking in my family, I grew up with parents that I saw be active sometimes in something that was quite different from many people. And then my children were. And then I was just recently sorting through some things for my grandchildren, and I found some signs that they had made a number of years ago. So I'm wondering about, I guess I want to comment about the importance of being involved when you're setting an example for the rest of your family. But are there any things that you're trying to do with fairly young children to get them going on things?
Yeah, I would say one thing that we're doing is a lot of the staff that we've hired, especially since we've grown in the past year, are under 30. We have a very young staff that cares a lot about this work and understands what the younger generations today care about and how they like to um, be involved in activism and advocacy. Um, we've also expanded our social media reach. Within the last year, we've created a TikTok account, um, and are using different approaches to have people learn about what our organization is and get involved, that we've never done before. Luce, do you want to expand on that at all?
I think that's right. And as someone who doesn't do social media and like doesn't even understand how to get onto TikTok, I'm like, okay. And a lot of the younger staff are laughing and saying, Luce, like you have to be on TikTok. I think the other thing that we're doing is, in addition to everything Riva mentioned, is connecting with our partners who are more connected with younger groups. We do engage in all sorts of activities with a lot of our partners, like a youth lobby day where youth go down and experience what lobbying is like and work with us on that front. We do have internships for young folks, usually like college age, law school, grad school, undergraduate type of folks. And in terms of connecting, so I'm really proud of this. I was just talking to Bill about this in terms of connecting with partners. Really, wherever we have connections, we connected with an artist named Chapel Roan, who was amazing and invited our team to collect signatures at her concert here in Kansas City like a week ago. And so we had staff who went out there who were talking about how they got to like hang with the young crowd and see what it was like to be a hip person these days, which people at my age range, I feel like we're not there anymore. But it's kind of neat to see that. And the feedback I got was just the energy of the young people in the crowd, their very visible, inclusive nature and welcoming nature of all. Was just really, really transformative for the staff who went to go and collect signatures for Missourians for constitutional freedom.
Yeah, my question kind of relates to you talked about how the First Amendment is one of the issues that is one of your key issues. And it feels like to me, many people on a certain perhaps progressive non-progressive state use First Amendment anytime they are criticized or by anyone. And I wonder how you were dealing with the tension of what really is the First Amendment and what does the First Amendment protect and what doesn't the First Amendment protect. For instance, being a bigot on social media and getting banned, to me, doesn't impact First Amendment rights. Being arrested by the police for being at a protest does. So, kind of how you are educating people as to what is and is not First Amendment rights.
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of growing development in that area. So one of the things that I have to remind folks when we're talking about First Amendment rights is we are talking about government censorship, right? Or government interfering with your First Amendment rights. And so it gets murkier when we're talking about companies that are not government owned or companies, right? There are some arguments that are being developed and made around whether they should be considered government entities developing. In terms of the work here in Missouri, we have really focused on, um, in the most recent years, government censorship of things like books, in addition to the protester rights. That's been where we've focused our efforts. And we did have a recent case where it was about this is again like the developing nature of the First Amendment, given our technology, which I think when the First Amendment was written, our technology was very different. So it involved a government official banning someone from their social media account. It was the government official's government social media account. They banned someone for a post that that person put. Um, which they disagreed with. And so we did litigate over that issue. We are back in court over that issue. We expect to succeed on that issue. We had a really good opinion that suggested when a government employee is using a social media account for the purposes of their government um, uh, relationship, for the purposes of them serving on the government, and it's run by like their staff, it's run by them, it is again like that is government censorship when they ban someone from that account because they don't like whatever the post was. And I wish I could tell you what social media form it was, but I do not remember. Twitter? Okay. Now X. Okay. See, I'm not the social media guru here. But it is developing. And I think as technology is changing and the world is changing, it will continue to develop.
You have many irons in the fire. How do you assemble groups of lawyers to work on them? And is this all pro bono work on their part, or do you have to pay them for some of this?
Yeah, so we have our own team of litigators, and we have a robust team of litigators, which is wonderful. And we have litigators who work on our other teams, but who also have their law degrees and engage in the litigation as needed. We do work with what we call cooperating counsel. Often these are attorneys at a law firm where the law firm has agreed to engage on this work. An example of that is Brian Cave is a cooperating counsel that is working like hand in hand with us on the gender affirming care litigation, which is it requires a lot of support. We also work in collaboration with a lot of partners. So Lambda is a group of attorneys that has more of a national presence who is working with us in addition on that gender affirming care case. And so we assemble teams of attorneys that are primarily our attorneys and then work in collaboration with partner attorney groups and cooperating counsel who are willing to give their time pro bono and use the resources that they have already accessible to them to help support the litigation and the work that we are engaging in.
Do you see artificial intelligence being a potential draw for the ACLU to inflict or deal with complications?
Yes, yes. And in fact, that's part of the privacy work that we've been working on, mostly up in the legislature, really identifying where some of those privacy issues are at stake, and where we have to be careful, and why we need to be careful, and who is getting that information. I mean, we just heard what happened with, was it Google, where they were saying you could search incognito and they weren't storing your information or data, and yet they were, and then they were giving it to and selling it to others. So it's really problematic when we don't have a close eye on artificial intelligence and sort of what's happening. Um, we know that there's going to be there's probably going to be some upcoming issues relating to uh, the artificial intelligence that creates what looks like to be a human, sounds to be like a real person, but isn't. And then, whose faces they're using. How close are they to the real people, and how are real people being impacted?
So, Luz, I have another technological question, and it deals with the Second Amendment. How has the ACLU addressed the change of technology from muskets to AK-47s? And Kansas City has had a spate of gun violence recently. What is the national position on the Second Amendment, as well as Missouri ACLU's position on the Second Amendment?
Yeah, so the Second Amendment, we don't do a whole lot. We don't do work really on the Second Amendment. We focus on the First Amendment work. And in terms of doing work, it has not really been direct Second Amendment type of work. We know that that's also developing. It varies from state to state. And it's not an area of focus for the ACLU.
Um, but do you have a personal position with regard to I mean, I don't want your personal position. I want to know the position of the ACLU of Missouri with regard to personal rights to carry weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, so the ACLU of Missouri has a policy position on personal rights, but again, we don't engage in a whole bunch of that work, and it hasn't been updated. But our board is actually actively looking at updating all of our policy positions, and I do know that the uh, Missouri position is slightly different from what the ACLU national position is in terms of the policy issue itself.
Do you see the ACLU having some funding issues associated with raising funds from citizens? I get an email occasionally saying, "Please donate here." It sounds sometimes somewhat like we're in trouble.
So what I will say, and I can pass it over to Reba, who probably has a closer eye on development. But what I will say is this is a particularly challenging year for any nonprofit organization in terms of fundraising. Uh, Across the board, fundraising is down for any nonprofit. That is also something that we at the ACLU of Missouri understood was coming and have planned for. So, in terms of the ACLU of Missouri, we have a sustainability plan where we expected to be running budget deficits for this year and for probably the next few years. But we planned for that, given what we know we can sustain. Uh, and so, in terms of trends, it is a national trend that fundraising is down overall for nonprofits. We're very proud at the ACLU of Missouri to be meeting our goals and the goals that we expected. And our national office is experiencing the same trends that everyone is experiencing. Did you want to say anything else, Reba, from the development side?
Build it out, or yeah, I think you answered it pretty well. It is it been a slower year the past year. And with it being an election year, some people are putting their money toward candidates and other campaigns. We have our Missourians for Constitutional Freedom campaign as well, that we're fundraising for. So it's stretched in a lot of different ways, which is why you might be getting more emails this year than you have in the past. But our affiliate in particular has a really great strategy for the future and how we are managing our budget. So I think we are good for now.
I'm sure both you and the people you work with have really dedicated your lives to this work. If you have a moment, I'd like to hear just a bit about a little bit about your backgrounds, what motivates you, why you are doing this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually came from a corporate background. I was in business to business sales for a long time. And then in 2020, the pandemic hit. Um, and George Floyd happened, Black Lives Matter protest. We had another election where Trump could have been president again. And I really took the time to reassess what I was doing, went back to school, and uh, wanted to go somewhere where I could make a change. And luckily, my background in sales and negotiations and building relationships translated over really well to a fundraising position. So I came to the ACLU of Missouri and have been here for almost 3 years now. And I'm just so proud of the work that we've done. It's amazing to be a part of.
Yeah, so I'll say, uh, primarily right now, what motivates me is that child over there who's sitting reading her book, wearing the Dissent is Patriotic shirt. I do a lot of the work that I do thinking of her every day and the future that I want to create for her. This particular campaign is near and dear to me because my 11-year-old is in a state with a total abortion ban and might need reproductive health care that she will not have access to here in Missouri. And I want to look her in the eye in November, at least August or November of 2024, and say, you have the right to control your body. Um, that's really what inspires me. What led to my work here at the ACLU is I'll say I came from a background with two immigrant parents who came to the United States from Mexico. My mother was undocumented for a part of my childhood and was very, very fortunate to receive amnesty in 1986, which put her on the path towards citizenship. And one of the things that my mother always emphasized for me was, well, she emphasized two things, which was, citizenship is important because that means you get to vote. And that means that you have control over how things are run. Voting is important. She understood that. And she also understood education is important. She said, you have to be an educated woman who can take care of herself and any children she bears without the support of anyone else. Um, and so all of that really inspired me to go to college, to go to law school. At the time, I was seeing also a lot of immigrant rights issues. I went to college when 9/11 happened, and there were the Guantanamo Bay detainees. And I started to follow the work of David Cole, who is now the ACLU National Litigation Director, around the due process rights of non-citizens. And I thought, wow, I want to do that work. And I remember going to law school and thinking it would be a dream if I could work for the ACLU. I never imagined having the opportunity to run a statewide affiliate. And I'm really humbled and feel very privileged every day for that opportunity.
You mentioned the case that went to the Supreme Court where, and no, the Secretary of State basically delayed the ballot language until it was too late. And we see a lot of delay. As a lawyer, we always hear that justice delayed is justice denied. So, without spilling too many secrets, what tools do you have in your future litigation to avoid delay, delaying past a deadline such that rights are denied? Is there any trick or what can you do?
Yeah, I think that goes to the legal strategy and the campaign strategy that we've been actively working on and toward. And so it is very much on our radar because we know that in order to get this on the ballot, the process has to keep moving forward. And we've planned for what to do if there are challenges in that area.
The discussion in Missouri and Kansas revolves around um, issues of urban versus rural communities, and that rural. My view of it, in fact, is that the rural communities have some idea that there's some that their tribe is different from the tribe in the urban areas. What are you guys doing for trying to kind of equalize that the tribal process?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think one of the amazing things about the ACLU is we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse candidates. We are an issues-based organization. And what I have found is that on the issues, uh, Missourians come together. So I was joking. I'm getting to know. I've been in St. Louis for 11 years, but I haven't quite gotten to know a lot of the other areas of Missouri in those 11 years. But for this year, where I've been traveling to speak about the Missourians for Constitutional Freedom campaign, and I have found myself in rooms that are rooms that I never expected to be in with folks who are supportive. So I'll share 2 weeks ago, I went to Monette, Missouri, and I stood in a room that was packed with more than 100 rural Missourians who came out to hear me speak about the Missourians for Constitutional Freedom ballot initiative, who were there to sign the petition, and who then also presented me with all of the petitions that they then had gone to like get signed because they were volunteering for the campaign. And it was really inspiring to be in this space with Missourians that really just were coming together saying government should not interfere in these private decisions, and that's why I'm here. You know, I may have myself a separate belief, but I don't believe that this should be the rule for everyone by the government. And so I find that to be the case, not just on this issue, but on a lot of our other issues. In our lobbying work in Jefferson City, that requires us to partner in order to be effective with what some folks would consider unlikely bedfellows. And we have to do that in order to move the ball. And that forces us to have discussions about the issues, not the partisanship.
I understand that the Missouri Supreme Court turned down the Attorney General as the latest attempt to delay the tactic. Is there anything left that he could do to keep this ballot initiative? I know it's going forward, and it's up to the governor whether it's done in August or in November.
Yeah, so the attorney general did try to delay. I did not go through the months of litigation that we spent fighting to even get to the point of signature gathering for the Missourians for Constitutional Freedom ballot initiative. We went to court again and sued the attorney general. That went all the way up to the Missouri Supreme Court. We won. Then we had to go to court and sue the Secretary of State. That went up and down the courts. We won. So there was a lot of litigation. In terms of next steps, the attorney general doesn't have a next step at this point. It would be the Secretary of State who has to validate the signatures, and then the governor who puts it on the August or November ballot. That being said, what we saw happen in terms of the litigation that we had to do this summer is unlike what anyone has ever seen in any other initiative petition that has been brought in Missouri. And that is a process that has been around for over 100 years. And so we are planning for even the unimaginable, because we know that that's the tactics that they have used up until this point. Like at no point in time had an attorney general refused to accept the auditor's fiscal note for a ballot initiative in prior times than in this case. They will try anything and everything, and we're going to be ready no matter what.
All right, Luz and Riva, thank you very much. I have one more question. It seems like it's a constant fight, and it seems like the fight has been going on for decades and perhaps longer. A, what keeps you going? What keeps you fighting? And B, maybe it's the same answer, but can you tell us about a victory or something that gave you heart about the work that you do?
Well, since we're on the topic, I do think the fact that we are gathering signatures on this ballot initiative is a victory for our democracy, because we had to fight tooth and nail just to get to the signature collection part. And that motivates me as well, because if we've gotten this far when they tried everything to even stop our ability from getting to this point, we have to get to the end. So for me, that's a victory in and of itself. And um, we've had a lot of other victories. Last year, we had I get emotional when I think about it. We had a longstanding client, Bobby Bostic, who we had fought for years. He was sentenced to over 100 years in prison for a non felony or a non uh, uh, violent sort of, well, it was a violent offense, but as a juvenile, he was sentenced at 16 to over 100 years in prison, which we argued is unconstitutional because the Supreme Court has said you can't sentence juveniles to life in prison. The state fought us saying we didn't sentence him to life in prison. We sentenced him to over 100 years in prison without parole. So we fought that case for many, 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 many years. Unfortunately, we weren't as successful as we wanted to be in the courts. But what we did was then we lobbied for legislation to pass to allow children in this situation in Missouri. Well, he's an adult now, but children who who were placed in jail in this similar situation to be given the opportunity for parole. And he was released last year. I was there when he walked out of prison. He had not he's around 50 years old now. He had served a lot of time in prison. He had not been out of that prison since he went in at the age of 16. And that was a true heart-wrenching moment to see his family come and embrace him. He's an entirely changed individual. He goes around and he speaks. He works with the public library now because one of his missions in the prison was to create a library for the inmates. That's what he spent his time in prison doing because he loved to read. He was a kid when he went in.
Um, yeah, for me, I have the fortunate ability to be more public facing than a lot of my colleagues. I get to talk to our supporters every day, and that really what is the thing that gives me hope and optimism here. The way in just the past couple months since we got some of the data back that this initiative could move forward, the way people have organized and come together and are really making this happen is just so inspiring, and that's a victory that keeps me going.
Thank you. So next week, April Holman, Executive Director of the Alliance for Healthy Kansas, will talk about Kansas Medicaid expansion efforts. And I'd like to thank our volunteers and staff of the forum today for their hard work. Thank you to Luz and Riva for being here and to the ACLU for all your hard work.